How has Kenny Omega's booking in All Elite Wrestling been? Well, a lot of people have their critiques and criticism, but I personally think he's been booked perfectly, and you'll see why here on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. Joining me is Ralph Valenti for news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling. Subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. So, Ralph, all this talk about Kenny Omega, especially this week where he is teasing the return of the cleaner gimmick, and people kind of started this debate. I know it's been a debate for a while on whether or not he's actually been booked strongly in All Elite Wrestling. We took a poll recently on our community page, and of course, to be a part of those polls, all you have to do is subscribe. And honestly, the results are that he has been booked strong, but it could be better. What do you think of the booking with Kenny Omega in his first year in All Elite Wrestling?
Yeah, and I think I'm going to agree with the people who voted in our comment section there. So I think that he's been booked strongly, especially considering right now he's one half of the tag team champions for AEW. But I think that he could have certainly been booked a little bit better. Some of that I think is obviously his own choice. If you go back to, I think it was in November, he did an interview where he admittedly said, you know, he feels like he's done more than enough. And he wants to take kind of like a backseat so they can get some of these younger guys to get over and get some recognition and get some TV time. I think that's commendable that he's willing to step aside like that, noting that he's patient and that he's willing to take his time before he's actually put into that position. And, you know, it certainly seems like that time is right around the corner if he actually turns heel and goes full in the cleaner gimmick here. But I think the thing that's might be a little disappointing with all of this is he still hasn't, in my opinion, lived up to the expectation that I think a lot of people had when he came over from New Japan Pro Wrestling. And I think a lot of people thought that he was going to be like the guy in AEW, and he hasn't necessarily been the guy, at least not yet.
But here's the problem. It's been 1 year. No guy can be the guy for a promotion in the first year. And when you have a new promotion like AEW that gets put on TNT and gets national and international recognition, you can't go with a guy, especially when it's based in the United States, with someone that hasn't wrestled in the United States in national television. You got to go with someone that has done that. And that's what AEW did. And that was perfect. They went with Jericho as the first champion, and they've gone with Moxley as the second champion. And by doing that, I mean, they've been doing very well in the ratings, winning, you know, getting in the top 5 in the demos. And we don't need to talk about ratings here, but a guy like Kenny Omega, they are booking to still be that best bout machine and still getting a lot of wins. It's not like he's been buried and losing all these matches. He actually has the most wins in All Elite Wrestling and has been put kind of on the back burner for guys like Jon Moxley to shine, for guys like Jericho, and for Jericho to use his shine to go on a guy like Orange Cassidy, for Moxley to use his shine to use a guy like Brian Cage, even Cody, for an example, using his shine for guys like Lance Archer, Ricky Starks, Darby Allin. So all these people are getting put in the spotlight, yet Kenny Omega, who has all these wins, is getting put in the back burner. And why is that? He should be the top guy, and people are talking about it. Wait, why is he being put in the back burner? He's the top guy. This is why it's been booked perfectly, because now you have to actually think about this. And because you're thinking about it, now you see it on television this past week on Dynamite where he's starting to get frustrated. Like, I should be the top guy. Why am I not?
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is this. When you look at it that way and you say, well, Kenny's being put on the back burner because he hasn't necessarily worked in the United States, and he was really popular in Japan, and that doesn't always translate to the United States and all of that. The only thing that I'll say about that whole situation is this. Not too long ago, Kenny Omega was most certainly the hottest thing in professional wrestling. Along with the Bullet Club, Kenny Omega, who was a leader of that group, was probably the most over thing outside of the WWE. You can probably make the argument, and I would certainly say this, that AEW might not even be a thing if Kenny Omega didn't go out there and have the matches that he had with Okada.
I agree.
And the reason I'm going to say that is this. When that whole situation happened where he had the match with Okada and Dave Meltzer gave it like the 6 or 7 stars, that's when people really started to pay attention to Kenny Omega, at least the casual fan, right? So he was able to bring more eyes and more attention to New Japan Pro Wrestling and to bring attention to himself and the Bullet Club. And it got over, and it got over in a big way. It got over so much to the point where, they had All In. They were able to book what I think a lot of people thought was going to be a rematch with him and Okada to headline there at Madison Square Garden. Ultimately, we know that didn't happen, but I think most people would agree that the reason that sold out was probably because a lot of people assumed at the time that Kenny Omega was probably going to headline there. So I think the issue that I have with that, and I certainly understand what you're saying, and to a certain extent, I do agree. The only issue I have is if you're Tony Khan looking at it, it's almost like you have this guy who has all this attention and who has all this momentum, probably the hottest thing outside of the WWE. And if I'm a business owner and I'm Tony Khan, I want to bring him into my company and I want to make sure that momentum carries over. And I want to make sure that momentum carries over because the casual fan who is watching or who has at least heard of Kenny Omega and the matches that he did have, if you're going to compare the stuff he was doing in New Japan, to some people, especially the casual fan, it might not hold weight. It might not be as impressive. And you might watch him and say, it's not as good as what I thought it was going to be. Granted, he has been booked mostly strong. He has had good matches. I mean, his match against Ray Phoenix, albeit that it was in AAA, his matches with Moxley, I think most people, especially AEW fans, did like that.
And let's not forget the tag team championship match at Revolution that everyone's calling the greatest tag team match ever.
Well, there was that. His matches with Pac were certainly good. So it's not like he's not going out there and he's not delivering. But I think to a certain extent, he certainly lost quite a bit of momentum. And it's hard. I mean, especially in professional wrestling. I don't care if you're on the top in the WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, or AEW. It's hard to maintain that momentum. But the Kenny Omega that is right now in AEW, I think a lot of people would agree that that's not the same Kenny Omega that had that momentum coming out of those matches with Okada and the guy that I think a lot of people thought we were going to get in AEW. They could still right this ship, but I think in doing this, it's kind of like a disservice to the fan because I think a lot of the fans, at least the casual fans, kind of tuned out watching Kenny Omega because it's not necessarily the guy that they anticipated in AEW.
I agree to a point where you're saying, yes, I've seen this in social media where some of the fans that were like, oh, I've heard all this hype of Kenny Omega and it's not exactly clicking. I just don't get it. There are people like that. And of course, there's those people that just hear what Jim Cornette says and he's just nothing but jazz hands. And they see that and they go, well, he's just jazz hands and he's goofy. I get that too. But here's the other thing you got to take into consideration. We know Kenny Omega is one of the EVPs. Obviously, Cody is also one of the EVPs. And basically, people would consider Cody like the face of AEW. Would you say that he's the face of AEW? At least one of them?
I would say that at one point, and maybe even now, he was the most over face in AEW, yeah.
Right. So what is the one thing that people are saying about Cody that's kind of a negative right now?
Well, he's drawn criticism with people comparing him to Triple H and putting himself over because he's an EVP.
Exactly. So if Kenny Omega, who nobody really knows in the American professional wrestling world, unless you're like an absolute diehard wrestling fan that watches wrestling all over the world, follows the independents and all that, most people don't know who Kenny Omega is. But they do know he's one of the EVPs if they did a little research. So if he comes in and gets pushed as the top guy, you might get this effect where fans might be like, well, why are they pushing this guy? He's just getting wins because he's the EVP. Obviously, those that are big wrestling fans will tell you, no, it's actually a legit reason to be pushed. But you got to have guys like Jericho and Moxley be the forefront so that when Omega, is built properly, he's ready to take that title away from Moxley or whoever the AEW champion is at that time. So that's why you have to, it's like Kenny Omega is a boiling pot of water. When you first put that water in, it's going to be nothing. It's just water. But then you got to slowly add the heat and eventually it simmers and eventually it boils. And then you're going to get what you need to cook your macaroni or whatever you're boiling your water for, tea, whatever it is. That's what Kenny Omega is. Kenny Omega is the boiling pot of AEW. If you start it immediately, you're never going to get it boiling. So you got to get that heat slowly rising for the water to boil.
Well, thanks for the physics lesson for all those listening. But yeah, I mean, back to what I was saying about him coming in and kind of losing some momentum. I think that you definitely make a good point. The only thing that I would compare it to is if you compare it to like professional sports, it's kind of like if you're the business owner and you go out and you bid on like the top player, the top free agent. That's what I kind of compare Kenny Omega to, because he was almost, well, I shouldn't say almost signed. He was definitely sought after by the WWE. And he even said that, you know, they were really good to him. They did offer him a good amount of money, and they were really trying to acquire him and bring him under contract. So it's not like he wasn't getting the attention of the biggest wrestling company in the world. New Japan, I'm sure they wanted to re-sign him. If you're Tony Khan and you're starting your company and you know that you're going to acquire the biggest free agent, and then to have him say things like, well, I'm going to take a step back because I've proven so much. One, yeah, you proved a lot in Japan, but like you pointed out, you haven't really proved all that much here in the States. So you still have quite a bit to prove. And two, if I'm going to pay you all this money and I'm the business owner, I need you to be the guy that you were in Japan, because that's what people want. That's what people like. That's why people are watching you. And that's why people follow you. They want the cleaner. They don't want Kenny Omega to sit there and say, oh yeah, I'm trying to book the tag team division, or I'm trying to book the women's division. I'm going to take a back seat and let all the young guys get the shine. To me, that's kind of like signing the hottest free agent and then having him go out there and say, yeah, well, I'm the best running back in the game, but you know what? I want to give some reps to the second string guy. That doesn't happen. That's where the coach steps in. And he's like, dude, we're paying you a lot of money. Get your ass out there and score some fucking touchdowns or something. Anyway, when we talk about Kenny Omega, like I said, he doesn't come without his critics. I think one of the things that we have to also consider is some people got a lot more over than initially anticipated. So yeah, I know it's partially a choice by Kenny Omega to say he wants to take a step back so some guys can get over. And that did happen. And I think that's also part of the reason why Kenny Omega isn't in a position where I think a lot of people saw him. So guys like MJF, I think a lot of people thought that he could get over, and he certainly went out there and got himself over. Guys like Jungle Boy, guys like Darby Allin, guys like Sammy Guevara. Sammy Guevara probably was the biggest guy that came from out of nowhere. Those guys getting over is certainly a good thing, but that also takes time away from Kenny Omega and takes opportunities away from him, because if people want to see the other guys, the younger guys, the guys that are up and coming, you know, there's only so much time on the show. I think the biggest thing that cut into Kenny Omega's ability to get over either as a face or a heel is the fact that Cody got so over. If you go back to when they were allowed to have people in the stands and allowed to have fans there, Cody was probably the most over face in professional wrestling. His feud with MJF right now is probably one of the better feuds we've seen in the past couple of years. Granted, their match maybe didn't deliver to the expectation that some people thought it would, but that feud itself and some of the promos that Cody was cutting during that really got him over. And I don't think they really anticipated guys like that getting over to a certain extent, especially Cody, because he really kind of came from out of nowhere. So being that other people got over, on top of the fact that Kenny admittedly wanted to take a step backward, well, of course he's going to have less airtime and he's not going to be able to get himself over to a certain extent, because more attention is going to be given to these guys that are on TV and getting their shit over.
Well, now here's the thing. Now, you say he admittedly said that he took a back seat, which, yes, he did. I'm not going to dispute that. But what's the difference between the diehard wrestling fan knowing that he said that and a casual fan just watching Dynamite, suspending disbelief, and just going by what they see on television? They don't know he said that. All they see is this guy won 28 times, the most in AEW since it started, and yet Cody's getting, you know, weekly title matches, giving these guys opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, like Jungle Boy and Sonny Kiss, who haven't really proved anything. You have Lance Archer and Brian Cage come out of nowhere, beat a few jobbers and get an AEW championship match or an AEW TNT championship match. Brody Lee coming out of nowhere, beating a couple jobbers and getting a championship match. Then Kenny Omega's here. Yeah, he's a tag team champion, but now the switch has finally been flipped, and it's like, why the hell am I been put in the back burner? Why the hell am I on the back seat? Where's my title shot? I've won more than anybody else in this promotion. That's the story that they're probably going to be telling in the future, and that's why we're going to get the return of the cleaner. If you just bring the cleaner out now without any reason, we might have this conversation like we had with Orange Cassidy. Why does he do the things that he does without a backstory? And you get this controversial storyline where some people get it and assume the reason, and some other people are just like, this is stupid. Mm-hmm. That could be what the cleaner is. It might be you need the backstory to help tell the full story.
Well, and even to your point, even part of that story could certainly be where Kenny can come out and cut a promo and say, look, they asked me to take a step back. They didn't want me to be the guy that I was in Japan. They didn't want me to be the cleaner because they wanted to get some of these guys some more exposure. So that could be the reason why he eventually walks away from the Elite, or there's this schism between the group, or whatever you want to call it, a riff. And that could be one of the reasons why Kenny eventually walks away from the group. Now, is that going to happen? I guess we're going to find out. There's certainly teasing a heel turn for Kenny Omega. But I guess we're going to see that within the coming weeks. And there's still, I mean, it's not like he's been booked into oblivion. Like you pointed out, he's got a good record, especially in a company where your record and your standing is supposed to be important. He is one half of the tag team champions. He is going out there and having good matches. So it's not like he's not delivering. It's just that I think a lot of people think that he can do a lot better than this. And there's time to fix that. And there's time to correct that. And there's a time where he's going to win the AEW championship. I mean, there's no way you're going to convince any professional wrestling fan or somebody who follows AEW that this guy's not going to win the championship at some point.
Right.
When that happens, as long as he can be the guy that he was in Japan, I think he'll get over in a huge way with a lot of people, including the casual fan.
Right.
Because I think that a lot of people, when you compare how they perform as a heel versus how they perform as a face, most people are more comfortable as a heel. At least that's what most of them will say.
True.
When you listen to interviews and things like that. So Kenny's probably just better at being a heel. There's nothing wrong with that. So I guess those things will certainly unfold within the next coming week to months. And we'll see if we're going to probably revisit this conversation at some point soon, I'd imagine. Yeah,
probably in another year when we see that Kenny Omega has had a long reign as AEW champion, and we can revisit this, and you could say, Ralph or Michael, you were right. He was booked perfectly, and this was the start of it, and now we see it at full circle. So,
hey, before you close, I got a surprise for you.
Oh no, what?
This is a first in our SCPB history.
What?
The very first time I'm going to unveil the first piece of merchandise.
Oh, geez. Here we go. What the hell is that? Oh, God. It's a bandana that says, fuck OC.
Yeah, fuck that guy. Anyway, you can get this for the mere price of $69.69 on scpb.gov. All the proceeds will go to me in my bank account. For anybody who's going to sulk over this piece of cloth and this beautiful piece of merchandise that I spent all of 20 minutes creating, I couldn't give a shit less.
Well, we don't have a story yet, but when we do, I'm sure we'll put that on there. So let us know in the comments what you guys think of Kenny Omega's booking and Ralph's new merchandise idea. Don't forget to share us all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, SCPB Podcast. And for news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling, subscribe.